They called him the Glitch. A stray cat with a missing tail and a jagged ear, living in a city that only valued perfection. But when the world's most advanced nuclear reactor began to melt down, the city's perfect machines failed. Only a broken cat could reach the core. This is the story of Static, the hero the world tried to forget, the invisible resident. In the year 2088, the city of Orizon stood as a monument to human ego. It was a place where the sky was perpetually filtered to a perfect crystalline blue and the streets were paved with a self-cleaning chrome that never allowed for a speck of dust. In this world of absolute precision, perfection was the only currency. If a drone malfunctioned, it was recycled. If a tree withered, it was replaced by a holographic substitute. There was no room for error, and certainly no room for the unscripted. Then there was Static. He was a scruffy calico cat whose existence was a direct defiance of the city's laws. His fur was a chaotic mosaic of orange, black, and white, a mess of biological noise in a world of digital silence. He lacked the sleek, metallic finish of the city's robotic pets. Instead, he carried the physical history of his struggles, a notched left ear from a narrow escape with a cleaning drone and a missing tail that had been lost to a hydraulic door years ago. Static lived in the gut of the city, specifically Sector 9. This was the industrial underworld where the massive fusion pipes hummed and the air smelled of ozone and hot metal. While the elites walked the gardens above, Static navigated the labyrinth of steam vents and server racks. He was a creature of the shadows, moving with a silent, limping grace that kept him invisible to the security cameras that patrolled the upper levels. To the citizens of Orizon, a stray cat was a system error. They didn't see a living being, they saw a pest that carried bacteria and unpredictability. Whenever he ventured near the sunlight of the plazas, people would recoil as if seeing a ghost. Security guards were programmed to shoo him away with sonic emitters, and children, raised in a world of plastic toys, often threw discarded tech scraps at him just to see him run. Despite the hostility, Static held no malice. He was a master of his metallic kingdom, knowing exactly which pipes ran warm enough to sleep on and which grills provided a view of the stars. He spent his nights watching the city pulse with light, his bright green eyes reflecting the neon advertisements for products he would never need. He was the only thing in Orizon that wasn't programmed, and that made him the most dangerous thing in the city. He survived on the margins, eating the nutrient-rich synthetic scraps left behind by maintenance crews and drinking the condensation from the cooling towers. He was lonely, but he was free. He was the ghost of the machine, a silent observer of a civilization that had traded its soul for a shiny exterior. Static didn't know why he had been born into a world that hated him, but he knew every inch of its dark, humming heart the only friend. Deep within the core of Sector 9 sat the office of Dr. Aries. At 80 years old, Aries was the lead engineer of the city's fusion core, but he was treated with the same cold indifference as the machines he maintained. The younger scientists, with their neural implants and high-speed processors, viewed his handwritten notes and physical blueprints as relics of a primitive age. Like Static, Aries was a biological anomaly in a world that preferred silicon. The bond between the man and the cat began on a rainy Tuesday, or at least the city's version of rain, a scheduled misting of the atmospheric filters. Aries had been sitting at his desk, staring at a holographic schematics that wouldn't balance. He looked up and saw a pair of green eyes reflecting the blue glow of his screens. Instead of calling for a removal drone, Aries reached into his lunch bag and pulled out a small carton of real cream, a rare luxury in the city. He placed the saucer on the floor and stepped back, his movement slow and non-threatening. Static watched him for a long time, his ears twitching at the rhythmic sound of the man's heavy breathing. Eventually, the hunger won. Static descended from the vent and drank, his small tongue lapping at the cream while Aries watched with a sad, knowing smile. From that moment on, they were no longer alone in the cold heart of Sector 9. Every night at midnight, the ritual continued. Aries would talk to the cat about things he could never tell his colleagues. He spoke of a time when the world was green, when cats weren't errors, and when a man's worth wasn't measured by his processing speed. Static would sit on the edge of the desk, his tail stump twitching, listening to the vibration of the human voice. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the kindness behind them. The lab was a cinematic sanctuary. The clinical, cold blue lighting of the machinery was softened by the warm, amber glow of Ares's ancient desk lamp. In this small circle of light, the cat and the man found a peace that the rest of Orizon couldn't provide. Ares would occasionally reach out to scratch the one ear Static had left, and for a few moments, the scars and the cold metal vanished. However, the world outside the lab was changing. The fusion core was being pushed to its limits to power the city's ever-growing digital demands. Ares often fell asleep at his desk, his white hair illuminated by the flickering warning lights of the system he could no longer fully control. Static would stay by his side, a silent sentry in the dark, sensing the growing instability in the very floorboards beneath them, the silent alarm. The disaster began with a sound that wasn't a sound at all, it was a feeling. At 3:14 a.m., the floor of Sector 9 began to hum with a jagged, discordant frequency. Static, curled up on a warm server rack, jolted awake. His whiskers vibrated with a terrifying intensity. Deep within the reactor's primary cooling loop, a microscopic fracture had finally given way under the pressure of the overclocked system. A jet of radioactive steam began to hiss into the dead zone, a cramped, lead-lined crawl space that housed the manual override valves. Because the fracture was so small and located in a shielded area, the city's central AI dismissed the pressure drop as a sensor glitch. The automated alarms remained silent. The city above continued to glow with neon beauty, unaware that its heart was starting to bleed. Static paced the narrow metal walkway, his fur standing on end. He could smell the ozone, he could feel the air thickening with a metallic tang that made his nose itch. He looked down at the main console where Dr. Ares was slumped over, his head resting on his arms. The man was exhausted, his oxygen levels dropping as the failing ventilation system began to pump carbon dioxide back into the room. The lighting in the lab shifted to an ominous, pulsing red as the backup sensors finally began to struggle against the Ares all-clear command. The shadows grew long and distorted, dancing across the glass walls like reaching hands. Static let out a long, haunting meow, a sound of pure biological terror that cut through the mechanical drone of the lab. He ran to the desk and clawed at Ares's sleeve, but the man didn't move. The heat was rising rapidly now. The polished chrome of the floor began to shimmer with heat distortion. Static knew the rhythm of this place better than anyone. He knew that the white-hot light coming from the floorboards meant the core was reaching its breaking point. If the manual dampening rods weren't released within the next few minutes, Sector 9 would become a crater, and Orizon would vanish in a flash of nuclear fire. Static looked at the exit, the ventilation shaft that led to the surface, to the cool air and the safety of the alleys. He could save himself. He was a stray, an outcast, a glitch that the city wanted to erase. Why should he stay? He looked back at the old man who had given him cream and scratches, and for the first time in his life, the cat made a choice that wasn't about survival. Into the fire. Static dove into the narrow maintenance hatch that led to the dead zone. The air inside was a furnace. His lungs burned with every breath, and the radiation made his vision swim with static, a cruel irony for a cat with his name. He was crawling through a forest of white-hot pipes and sparking wires, his calico fur singeing against the metallic walls. The crawl space was too small for a human and too radioactive for the city's delicate service robots, whose circuits would fry instantly in this environment. But Static was made of tougher stuff. He moved with a desperate, frantic speed, his paws touching surfaces that blistered his pads. He was a blur of orange and black against a background of blinding, industrial light. As he reached the core's primary valve chamber, the cinematic scale of the danger became clear. The massive cooling pipe was glowing a translucent, lethal violet. Sparks showered down on him like burning snow. The sound was a deafening roar of escaping steam, a mechanical scream that felt like it was tearing the world apart. Static's green eyes were wide, reflecting the chaos around him. He found the emergency manual lever. It was a heavy, rusted piece of iron tucked behind a high-voltage cage. It required 50 pounds of pressure to drop, a weight far beyond that of a small, malnourished stray cat. Static leaped onto the lever, grabbing the iron with his front claws and letting his body hang. The lever didn't budge. The heat was so intense now that his vision was fading to black. He looked through a small observation port back into the lab. He could see Dr. Ares, still unconscious, his face pale in the dim light. Static thought of the milk, the soft voice, and the feeling of a hand behind his ear. He let out a final, guttural growl and threw himself upward, using every ounce of momentum to slam back down onto the iron handle. There was a sickening crack as the lever finally gave way. Static felt a massive surge of electricity arc from the cage through his small frame. His muscles locked, his heart stuttered, and a blinding flash of white light consumed his world. As he fell toward the scorching floor, the last thing he heard was the heavy, rhythmic thud of the dampening rods finally slamming into place, the choice of a hero. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The roaring steam vanished, replaced by the hiss of automated fire extinguishers. The red lights in the lab flickered one last time and then stabilized into a calm, steady amber. The core was cool. The city of Orizon was safe, though its citizens would never know how close they had come to annihilation. Inside the lab, the sudden rush of fresh oxygen from the emergency vents finally woke Dr. Ares. He gasped, clutching his chest as he looked at the monitors. System stable, the screens read in cool, green letters. He looked at the manual override indicator, it had been triggered from inside the dead zone. He scrambled to the maintenance hatch, his voice trembling as he called out, "Static. Are you there?" He peered into the smoky, dark crawl space. The heat was still oppressive, but the lethal violet glow was gone. He saw a small, still shape lying on the floorboards. Ares reached in, ignoring the heat that blistered his own hands, and pulled the cat out. Static's fur was blackened, his breathing so faint it was almost non-existent. The man who had built a city of glass wept as he held the scorched glitch in his arms. The rescue teams arrived minutes later, their heavy boots clanging on the chrome floors. They tried to take Ares to the medical bay, but he refused to go without the cat. For the first time in the history of Orizon, a stray animal was carried into the high-tier surgical wing. The doctors protested, citing hygiene protocols, but Ares shouted them down with a fury they had never seen. "This cat saved your lives," he roared. "You will save his." The cinematic mood of the hospital was a stark contrast to the lab. Everything was white, sterile, and silent. Static was placed in a hyperbaric chamber, his small body surrounded by healing mists and laser-guided sutures. Outside the glass, the old scientist sat in a hard chair, refusing to leave, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of the cat's chest. Days turned into weeks. The story of the cat of Sector 9 began to leak out. In a city that prided itself on logic, the idea of a stray cat risking everything for a human was a glitch they couldn't ignore. People began to gather outside the hospital, not with stones or tech scraps, but with flowers and hand-drawn pictures. The city of perfection was finally starting to understand the value of the imperfect of the new dawn. 1 month later, the sun rose over Orizon, but it looked different. The atmospheric filters had been tuned to a warmer, more natural hue. In a quiet suburb on the edge of the city, far from the humming fusion pipes, Dr. Ares sat on his porch. He was retired now, his hands no longer shaking, holding a mug of real coffee. Beside him, sitting on a velvet cushion, was Static. The cat was scarred, his fur would never fully grow back on his shoulders, and his notched ear was a little more jagged than before. But his green eyes were bright, and he looked out at the world with a calm, heroic dignity. He was no longer a ghost in the machine, he was a resident of a home. In the center of Sector 9, where the dead zone used to be, the city had erected a small monument. It wasn't a glowing hologram or a digital screen. It was a simple bronze statue of a cat with no tail, looking toward the reactor core. The inscription was simple, "To the glitch that saved the world." It served as a permanent reminder that even in a world of perfect machines, the most important thing is a heartbeat. The city of Orizon changed that day. The robotic pets were gradually replaced by real ones. The hygiene protocols were softened to allow for the messy, beautiful reality of life. The citizens learned that a scar isn't a flaw, it's a story of survival. And every night, the city's central AI was programmed to leave a digital record of the cat who had outsmarted it. Static didn't care about monuments or records, though. He was busy. He had a garden to explore, birds to watch, and a human who never forgot the milk. He moved with a slight limp, a reminder of his journey through the fire, but he moved with a purpose. He was the hero Orizon didn't think it needed, and the guardian it would never forget. As the sun set, casting long, golden shadows across the porch, Static let out a soft, contented meow. He curled up against Araz's leg, his eyes closing as he felt the warmth of a life truly lived. The city hummed in the distance, but for the first time in his life, Static wasn't listening to the machines. He was listening to the quiet, steady beat of a world that finally had a heart. Static was a system error in a world that hated him, yet he became the hero they couldn't live without. This story reminds us that our scars don't make us broken, they make us brave. If you believe every animal deserves a hero's ending, hit the like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe to Paws that saved lives so you never miss a miracle. Tell us in the comments, what is your pet's hero story? Let's fill the comments with the names of our own guardians.